Look at me. Go on, look at me. Don't be shy. What do you say? Maybe I'm a refugee. Or a child bride, forced into marriage. A child soldier, forced to fight. Maybe I'm a story on the news, to turn off and forget about. I'm just a child. I want to play with my friends, to run, to laugh. I want to learn. I want to grow. I want my voice to be heard. I want my life to count. I am the future. And I'm worth fighting for.
Good morning online, and good morning to all of you here in the room. Welcome. I'm extremely pleased to be able to welcome you on behalf of Save the Children here in Germany. My name is Florian Westphal, and I'm the CEO of Save the Children here in Berlin. And a special thanks already to all our panelists, and especially to Luise Amtsberg and to her team for her support of this event. It's a special event for me personally too. I started working in the humanitarian field in the late 90s for the International Committee of the Red Cross in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Sierra Leone later on. And I came across a lot of children who were victims of crimes, children who were detained, put in prison, children who were forcibly recruited and who were child soldiers, children who'd been separated from their families, who'd been forcibly displaced, who were wounded, attacked, etc. And as with the organization, we were able to help quite a few of those children at the time. However, I don't think I ever imagined that the people who were responsible for these violations committed against these children would be held to account. And we know that now, more than 20 years later, in today's conflicts, yes, there are many, many violations, many crimes that are committed against children. They are victims of grave violations. We know that despite encouraging progress, which we will talk about later today, national and international accountability mechanisms still fall short of really capturing the kinds of violations that are committed against children in wars every day. And even though children make up half of the people who are affected by conflicts globally, they are often denied the right to make their voices heard, as I think that clip just illustrated to us very strongly. As you know, children do have unique vulnerabilities, and they are affected differently by conflicts than adults. And therefore, the inclusion of child-specific, dedicated expertise and a focus on accountability mechanisms is really vital to make sure that priority is given to crimes against children and that they're effectively documented and investigated. If I look at this issue now, more than 20 years after my first experiences in the Congo and Sierra Leone, I do feel cautiously optimistic. Yes, countless crimes against children are committed and continue to go unpunished. But there's hope that there will be more accountability, and I think Germany recently has really played an important role in that regard, advancing justice internationally. We've seen most recently the historic court verdicts related to the conflict in Syria, which were based on the principle of universal jurisdiction. That progress was made thanks to many, many committed people in government, in obviously international organizations and institutions, but also in civil society. So it's really great that today we have some excellent representatives of all these important players and stakeholders in this debate with us here on the stage, but also, as you will see later, online by video. And we think that by bringing together this expertise from the international and the national level is a really effective way of making sure that we can benefit from each other's experiences, from each other's knowledge, and ensure that national and international mechanisms work together in the interests of children. So without further ado, I would like to hand the word to Philipp Frisch, who's the head of advocacy of Médecins Sans Frontières, of Ärzte ohne Grenzen here in Berlin, and who's today's moderator. Philipp, please.
Thank you very much, Florian, for kicking us off and for setting the scene, and also thank you very much for Save the Children for hosting this very important event. We have a lot of expertise on the panel today, here, but also online, so we have to stick to the time. I will try to be a little bit strict as a moderator. A couple of housekeeping before we start. So this event will be live streamed on YouTube and Zoom, and it will also be recorded. We will have approximately 1.5 hours for a panel discussion, and then later on there will be a chance for a couple of questions. But in order for us to actually deal with all these questions, I would ask everybody online and also here in the room to actually write an email with your question. Maybe mark it very clearly in the subject line and write it to accountability@savethechildren.de. And I think that later this email address will also be on the screen for you to see that. So without wasting much more time, I now hand over to Ms. Luise Amtsberg, who is the Commissioner for Humanitarian Assistance of the German government. I had to read that because I hardly ever say it in English. And she will have a couple of opening remarks, talk about the role of Germany and her personal remarks and view on the topic. Luise, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Mr. Westphal and Mr. Frisch. I'm truly honored to be part of this conference with so much expertise here in the room and online. Ladies and gentlemen, all children have rights in every part of the world. Paying special attention to them is one of the fundamental obligations we have in a values-led foreign policy. Sadly, in many parts of the world, these rights of children are violated. Poverty, wars, climate crisis, and hunger rob children of everything they need in terms of protection, love, and support. And I think in this conference you are asking exactly the right question when it comes to children's rights. What happens when those rights aren't respected? In so many areas of human rights, the actual rights aren't the problem. The problem is enforcing them and creating accountability when they aren't respected. When I took office in January this year, as part of the new German government, we made children's rights a stronger priority. To the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is our guidance. We committed to explicitly enshrine children's rights into our constitution and to introduce special financial assistance for children in need. For us, protecting the rights of children is an integral part of feminist foreign policy, because feminist foreign policy is an approach that aims to include those who are disadvantaged and marginalized. And very often that includes children who are voiceless in too many situations. We try to change that. Through our own project funds and through German development cooperation, we support partner countries in strengthening children's rights, including children affected by armed conflict. We promote education, health, poverty reduction, child protection, and food security in crisis and conflicts. Our funding to UNICEF has recently seen a very steep increase compared to 2019. That was really very important to us as a new government. Protecting children in armed conflict has been a long-standing priority for Germany. It was a major focus during our UN Security Council membership, We made sure to include this perspective into all relevant resolutions and peacekeeping operations. We push for transparent, evidence-based listings of those perpetrators to make sure that reporting is impartial, complete, and credible. That includes a strong partnership with civil society, such as Save the Children. And Germany also has signed the Safe Schools Declaration, and together with partners such as Argentina, Norway, and Nigeria, we lobby for more states to join. Educating members of armed groups, state or non-state, about children's rights to safe education in all circumstances is, in my view, an important step to prevent crimes. Child-centered justice mechanism must take into account the specific rights and needs of children. And they must be accessible and age-appropriate, and recognize the right to due process, to participation in the proceedings, and to respect for private and family life, as well as to integrity and, of course, dignity. We welcome all approaches that support the International Criminal Court in its efforts to protect children's rights in conflict. Ukraine is a very good example, I think. Germany, as the second largest financial contributor to ICC, has focused on impunity right from the outset of the Russian war of aggression. In March 22 this year, Germany, together with 41 other state parties to the Rome Statute, formally referred the situation in Ukraine to the ICC chief prosecutor for investigation, who immediately opened an investigation and sent a team of investigators to Ukraine. We also immediately respond to the chief prosecutor's request in spring and provided additional fund. And of course, we have offered 8 additional experts for investigation on the ground. But I will be honest, we need to do a lot more to ensure full accountability for violations and crimes affecting children in conflict. How we can achieve that, how we can improve our commitment, how we can put more pressure on those responsible is not a process that ever can be completed, in my opinion. Instead, we need to review ourselves regularly and keep asking, what can we do better to protect the most vulnerable? Children deserve this more than anyone, because children don't cause wars. They are not causing the climate crisis that is robbing them their chance to develop. And because that is the case, their protection is at the center of our foreign and domestic policy actions. This conference will contribute to that, and I look forward to learning more about from the experts today, what we can do more, how we can be better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Amtsberg, for your frank and open remarks on that important topic. I think this gives us plenty of opportunity to also then pick up the thematics with the panel. So let me now turn directly to Ms. Catherine Marchi-Uhel. I hope you're online. Yes, you are. You're still muted. No worries. Ms. Marchi-Uhel is a French judge, and currently she's the head of the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism on Syria, also known as the IIIM, and of the United Nations. And she is focusing on analysis and evidence international crimes committed in Syria. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work of IIIM and how this work is focusing on those crimes that are affecting children?
Yes, of course. But let me first tell you that it's a real pleasure to be part of this panel, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing the diverse perspectives from the speakers on this key issue of advancing justice for children and youth. For us at the IIIM, it's been a key component of our efforts to support inclusive justice with regard to core international crimes committed in Syria since March 2011. It's a core component of our victim and survivor-centered approach, and it goes hand in hand with other components, our thematic strategies on gender and broader justice objectives. But since our operationalization in 2018, we've made gradually progress in our efforts to prioritize children and integrate a children's right approach. We've also encountered some challenges, but just to give you an idea of how we proceed, we've identified several avenues for action. We wanted to act on the strategic level, but also on the operational level to be able to advance in both directions. So we've strengthened our internal architecture, and we have dedicated additional resources. At the strategic level, we've made progress with the development of a children and youth strategy that we are currently refining. And in addition, we are in the process of developing our implementation plan for the coming years, where thematic approaches play a significant role. The children and youth strategy is intended to assist the IIIM teams in their day-to-day work and across section. You've heard me saying children and youth, that is correct. This is because we are expanding our thematic approach, not just to children below 18, but also to young people as well, between 18 and 29, to include youth in our analysis. And our approach is to have a mechanism that is child and youth sensitive in all the undertaking that our mandate and terms of reference require. For instance, we have built expertise and focus on crimes against and affecting children and youth by having in place a mechanism-wide coordination and collaboration in the form of a working group on children and youth internally. We've recruited staff, including an investigator, a witness support officer with exceptional background and experiences in working with children in the context of accountability process. We have also integrated in the team a thematic expert on children and youth. And through these additional capacities, we've been able to develop dedicated tools on children and youth. This includes a policy paper that really guide our position on certain matter, for instance, on prosecuting child perpetrators of international court crimes, but also procedures and protocols that are either focused on addressing children and youth issues or integrate child-youth perspective into general protocols. Another important piece of our approach is to apply it to our engagement with stakeholders. For instance, we dedicated the November 2021 meeting that we regularly have to our Syrian civil society counterparts under the Lausanne platform to children and youth. We've conducted targeted consultation with Syrian civil society organizations, documenters, service providers, child protection agencies to inform our work, and that's enabling us to integrate their views into our strategy. And the latest avenue in which we are making progress with the collaboration of Syrian civil society is in efforts to reach out directly to children and youth and to engage with child and youth victims and survivors to gather information, views, and perspectives that we can then integrate into our work. Initially, this is an engagement that was designed for the purpose of refining and informing our strategy on children and youth, but ultimately and most importantly, our whole children and youth focus approach is really about finding ways and means to be in a constant conversation with children and youth, to give them a voice and to make that voice heard.
Thank you very much for this perspective into the way you're working. Let me follow up with one additional question. Can you maybe also expand a little bit more about the achievements you already made and maybe also some of the challenges that are still remaining? And maybe also how, like for example, a government like government of Germany can support your work?
Yes. So I say that obviously as a mechanism to support accountability, as a facilitator of justice, obviously our main output is support to competent jurisdiction. And we are very conscious that about the need for a child and youth sensitive approach in the analytical product that we develop and share with competent jurisdiction. Our strategy, as I said, on children and youth is still being developed, but we have already some achievements. We have been able to integrate a focus on the specific treatment of children in evidentiary module that we have completed and shared with those jurisdictions, and also to integrate that perspective in other that are under development. I'll give you a concrete example, and that is in the work that we recently completed and shared on the chapeau element of crimes against humanity. It's a module that establishes that ISIL, Daesh, is targeting particular groups in Syrian society for discriminatory treatment and how it amounted to a systematic attack against the civilian population. So we considered ISIL's discriminatory treatment of groups on the basis of religion and gender, but we also addressed its ideology and policies towards children and how it resulted in channeling young boys into military training and enlistment as child soldiers in the so-called camps of the caliphate, where girls were groomed for and forced into early marriage. This module looked at the treatment of children based not only on their age, but also on their gender and religious background, so an intersectional approach, if I can put it this way. And by including this targeted mistreatment of children within the characterization of the systematic attack and the chapeau element of crime against humanity, we sought to reflect crime against children as a core part of the broader pattern of crimes committed by ISIL. As I said, it's work that has been already shared with a number of jurisdictions, and we're now embarking on a targeted project which seeks to establish the structural elements of conscription and enlistment of children and the use in hostilities. And we look at ISIL policies, methods of recruitment, the nature of the training provided, the nature of use of children in hostilities, and the impact, of course, of these conduct on children. So that's a concrete achievement, and we hope by providing these modules to national jurisdiction, they're able to incorporate that perspective into the work that into the cases that they build and move to trial. Now, you asked me about how the German government can help in this work. I would say probably by continuing to do the excellent work that the jurisdiction are doing, and in the context of crimes committed in Syria, certainly Germany is a leader in that field by continuing to support the work that we do, which, as you know, Germany has been an important partner for us, starting at the General Assembly, and by making by their jurisdiction having the means to continue the work they do on Syria. Obviously, we're all concerned that with new conflicts coming up, with new areas of focus, we're all concerned at the TRIPAM that the situation of youth and children of crimes committed in Syria are not left aside, and that the jurisdiction can still invest time and efforts to bring justice to the victims of crime in Syria in general, and of course to young children and youth in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hear a very clear stay focused from your answer. Thank you also for sharing your expertise on your work. We are now turning to Ms. Dianne Luping. She is also already online and unmuted. Ms. Luping is the head of Gender and Children Unit at the International Criminal Court that was already mentioned a couple of times. Ms. Luping, you have recently been appointed as the head of Gender and Children Unit. What are the current achievements in progress, or what is the work in progress at the court when it comes to make children's crimes more visible, crimes that affect children?
Thank you very much, Philip. And before I respond, I just want to also say a big thanks to Save the Children, as well as the German government, who have kindly, co-hosted this event. We're very grateful to be involved and to have this opportunity to speak. First of all, in terms of achievements, well, I'm very thankful to be in this new role with the Gender and Children Unit within the Office of the Prosecutor, where I've been already for the last 18 years working at the court in various functions. In terms of our achievements and work in progress, well, obviously, all the work that the Office of the Prosecutor does, we consider it to be a work in progress. In terms of our achievements, we're building on the achievements that were already accomplished with the very start of the court with our own statute, where issues relating to children, including the various crimes against children, but the way in which we engage with children are all reflected both in terms of our statute and our rules of procedure. We've had the benefit of having experts from the Gender and Children since 2003 at the court, other experts and focal points within the office, but also external experts such as special advisors like Veronique Aubert from Save the Children, who is now assisting us at the office. We have a policy paper relating to children that we've had for some years now that we are able to build upon as a basis for our work, including taking into account best interests of children and the way in which we engage with them in our investigations and prosecutions. We've had certain successes. Our very first case at the ICC was a case against Mr. Thomas Lubanga involving his group's use and recruitment of child soldiers. We've had other notable successes in our cases, including in the case against Mr. Bosco in Tagunda. It was the first ICC case involving crimes against members of the same armed group, where we were able to prosecute for that. And this particular case involved rapes and sexual slavery of girl child soldiers within the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But as you mentioned, Philip, of course, this is all a case of work in progress. at the court, we recognize we do need to do better, like many other institutions, in making children more visible and making the crimes against or affecting them more visible in the work that we do at the court. And so what we are hoping to do is to achieve this through a number of ways. First, the Gender and Children Unit itself has been completely changed in our focus and in the work that we do. We are now integrated at the very start of the work of all of our teams, including from preliminary examinations through investigations, trial, appeals, reparations, and sentencing. We are bringing on board not only legal experts, but investigative experts. I myself have both a legal and investigative background. And so we're providing this advice at a very early stage to avoid what was happening in the past of this type of strategic advice being given basically a little bit too late. And the new prosecutor has really provided us the mandate to do that. Secondly, we're trying to be more progressive and forward-thinking in the way we approach our investigations and prosecutions. So we are proactively looking at how we prosecute our cases using the full toolkit of the Rome Statute. I'm looking with a number of teams at cases including persecution on the grounds of age and birth, other types of crimes against or affecting children, such as when children are forced to watch horrific crimes against their parents, such as rapes or murders, or where their parents have been victims of enforced disappearances, and looking at these as crimes in themselves against children, such as crimes of torture or other inhumane acts. So we're looking at, in a progressive way, using the Rome Statute as our toolkit. And we're looking at also ensuring that we improve our cooperation, our dialogue with other actors, including other key stakeholders and partners, such as state parties, such as Germany, and local and international civil and society organizations.
Thank you very much. That's already pretty impressive. Maybe one little follow-up, maybe you can expand a little bit more on some of the key measures you're planning when looking ahead, how to even further strengthen these mechanisms and what is in the works.
Thank you. In terms of what is in the works, I'd first just make a note about developing from our policy paper. We want to update and develop further protocols and guidelines related to children and other vulnerable persons. We're looking at children, youth, the elderly, as well as our various protocols and guidelines in terms of intersecting issues such as sexual and gender-based crimes. So that is in the works. We have a new updated Office of the Prosecutor's Manual that our team is currently working on helping to update, actually. So that's one aspect. Secondly, we're building ourselves institutionally. We have had the benefit, like other teams in the office, from secondments, including from Germany. And we will have a number of both staff and secondees, so our unit is growing. And we're very grateful for that because this is really critical to the work of the Office of the Prosecutor. And the staff and secondees include individuals, for example, from Asia Pacific, Europe, Africa, the Americas, as well as other regions. So we are looking at making sure that our unit is diverse and inclusive, so that we really reflect the myriad of issues that children and young people can be impacted upon. In terms of litigation, I've already mentioned that, in terms of wanting to take a very progressive and proactive approach on our litigation strategies. And finally, I would just want to make a note about the issue of cooperation and dialogue. The prosecutor has already worked towards the dialogue forum, our first thematic roundtable with members of local and international civil society organizations, but also from United Nations, will be actually on crimes against and affecting children. And we will be bringing individuals from different situation countries that we operate in to be involved in this roundtable that we will be hosting in November. We are also actively seeking to improve our dialogue and cooperation, as I said, including with countries such as Germany. So we want to sort of continue that dialogue and that cooperation. And I would just want to make one reference actually, and thanks to one example of our cooperation already with Germany. The head of your international crimes group within your federal prosecutors, Christian Reichter, who was involved in training that we did last year on reluctant insiders. And he spoke about the experiences from Germany in prosecuting, for example, crimes in Syria. That was fantastic, actually, to have this cross-fertilization of ideas and cooperation. And so I want to thank Germany again for that. And we look forward to closer cooperation with organizations such as Save the Children, but also state parties, including Germany.
Thank you very much for sharing this important work of the ICC. And you actually provided a perfect segue now to our next speaker. Because we have now talked a little bit about international fora and what kind of role they can play to actually advance justice for children affected by these kind of crimes. And we will now turn a little bit more to a national level. It has been mentioned a couple of times already, the principle of universal jurisdiction. Ms. von Wistinghausen, you are a defense attorney and you also have been involved in some of the court cases most recently happening in Germany that are based on that exact principle. Can you tell us a little bit more, maybe what your view is on what kind of like, how this principle can also help in bridging some of the gaps that we have learned so far in terms of crimes affecting children?
Yes, so, does that work?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. So I'm a defense attorney, but quite recently I've been involved in quite some victims representation. In the Yazidi cases that we have already talked about, well, ISIS cases where Yazidi women were participating victims. It's interesting for me actually to reflect that I can definitely say I'm not an expert on children's rights at all, and thank you for Save the Children for still inviting me, even though I've worked in the area of criminal law for nearly 20 years, and I've been involved with ICL cases, international criminal law cases, for about 15 years. So why is that? Of course, we all know that securing evidence from children is, of course, a complicated thing, be it on a national or an international level. And of course, we also know that children, even though they may not be specified in the law, and I made the exercise, I had a look at the Rome Statute and at the German Code of Crimes Against International Law, you will find the word child only 4 times as far as it's related to the material law. But of course, the law also talks about the civilian population, about groups, or about persons. And when we talk about persons or groups or civil population, of course, the children are included. But if we go to the practical side of things and to the courtroom, and this is where I spend most of my time, actually children, unfortunately, I have to say, don't play a big role. That was maybe a bit different in this case before the Higher Regional Court of Frankfurt, where an Iraqi national was accused of genocide of the Yazidi. I represented a Yazidi survivor, and she had been enslaved with her 5-year-old little girl in the household of this Iraqi man and a German woman who was married to this ISIS fighter. So of course in this very trial, there was a child in the focus, but it was this very specific story of the mother and this child unfortunately was killed in the household of the accused, and he was convicted for that. The case is on appeal, so we'll see what happens. But the focus, and maybe that's also interesting, was not on the international crimes, because in relation to the killing of the child, the accused was also accused of killing as a crime against humanity and killing as a war crime. But the focus really in the courtroom was on the national law. Is it a murder? Is it a manslaughter? Is it a serious bodily harm with the consequence of death? So this was more the debate than the international crimes. So from a practitioner's point of view, and I'm not a prosecutor, so I'm not privy to the strategy of the German Prosecutor General, but of course I'm observing their strategies because I can see the results of it. And I think, and Dianne Luping will probably agree with me, of course you have to choose your strategy and you have some discretion in what you prosecute and what you don't prosecute. And as a prosecutor, I suppose you want to be successful with your case. So that means you want to file a solid indictment. And for that solid indictment, you need solid evidence. And this, I think, also has as a consequence that, some crimes that have allegedly and supposedly in reality been committed won't be brought to justice because they will be difficult to prove. Also, I think we all agree we don't want children in the courtroom to testify there, right, for obvious reasons. So, of course, we can ask the parents, there are ways around the direct testimony of children, but this is an additional complication. And I can speak for the German courtroom. There were very serious crimes that, for reasons of judicial economy, were just dropped, including aiding and abetting genocide. So this is, in a way, it's very cynical. You can also call it unacceptable. But at the end of the day, the judges are also trying, to streamline the cases, not to have too many charges. And they want, just as the prosecutor wants to be successful with his case, judges want to have a conviction or an acquittal at the end of the day that stands on appeal. And in these cases, the appeal goes to the federal court. So, and that's it, it stops there. So there is this whole pragmatic approach of things as well that just can't be, by everything you say is absolutely right, but in practice, these issues will always play a role. And not to forget the resources that you need for the prosecution of these kind of crimes. So this is just, a little turnaround.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is a fascinating insight. And excuse my layman view on that. I'm not a lawyer. But it looks like that the system is rigged against children to a certain extent. So what kind of opportunities do you see from your practitioner viewpoint of systematically more have a focus also on crimes that are affecting children? How can we fix that?
Well, I think the law is there. You just have to apply it. That's not the problem. But I mean, the question is the courtroom the right place to do that? For, at the end of the day, help the children we are talking about. I'm thinking aloud. I'm not a specialist in this, but I think this is something that has to be taken into consideration. When you ask me, how do you strengthen children's rights? I mean, of course, I agree, we should speak more about children in the courtroom, but at the end of the day, it's by going into the communities and supporting the children there that there will be a real benefit for the individuals. And children, I mean, we're talking about children as a group. Children are all individuals. They're all, they have different backgrounds, needs. Of course, they're vulnerable, but I just want to, caution the hope that by having more judicial accountability, this will really have, an impact for the individual child. I know this is maybe, again, I'm putting this out here. I'm not sure I'm right by what I'm saying, but what I can say for sure is that the accountability, the individual criminal responsibility of one person will just be a small piece of the jigsaw. And we certainly have to look at a broader picture.
Thank you very much for this also a little bit reality check. I'm sure that this is maybe the right moment to also remind everybody about the email address where you can send in your questions, because I'm sure that there will be a couple of questions after your intervention. And thank you for sharing your perspective from a practical point of view. Let's now turn to Federica Tronchin. Federica is the head of the International Programs and Senior Gender and Child Rights Advisor. It's quite a mouthful of a job title. at the Justice Rapid Response, and it's a Geneva-based organization that provides rapidly deployable specialized justice experts to assist with investigations of reported war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, and serious human rights violations. Federica, can you tell us maybe a little bit about the work of the Justice Rapid Response to ensure international crimes against children are prosecuted?
Sure. Thank you, Philip. And thank you also to Save the Children and Commissioner Amtsberg for holding this panel. It's a pleasure to be here with the panelists that are shaping international justice and meaningful participation for children every day. At Justice Rapid Response, we worked in over 45 countries that are experiencing fragility or conflicts. And we noticed from the very beginning a gap that in almost all of the interventions we supported, which was the fact that crimes affecting children or against children were constantly overlooked. And to address this gap, we decided to have a proactive approach, which was to include a specific child rights angle in our programs, in our resources, in our researches into best practices around how to do that, and also in our engagement with the investigations partners that we engage with. And as a result, since 2020, we deployed 49 child rights experts in a lot of different situations. We work with the governments. So we supported the investigation units in Colombia and Uganda. We work with civil society organizations, and we support investigation efforts in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And we work with international organizations, and we supported, for example, UN investigations in human rights investigation in Central African Republic, Myanmar, Burundi, Syria, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, and most recently, Ukraine. And what we saw is that we can have the most impact in this topic when we work from the very beginning with all actors involved in the justice effort. And an example of this has already come up, and it's Iraq. When ISIS occupied the northern part of Iraq in 2014, the Human Rights Council established a UN fact-finding missions to ascertain whether violations of international humanitarian law were taking place. And at their request, at the request of the UN, we deployed an Arabic-speaking investigator that was able to really relate with the communities by knowing the cultural background and gain the trust of the victims that were just starting to escape from ISIS. And so she was able to collect the first stories of enslavement and make them public in a way that raised no doubts at the very beginning of the conflict around the horrors that were taking place in areas occupied by ISIS. And after that report was made public, the international community took actions. So the UN established UNITAD in support of Iraq's effort. In Iraq, national institutions and civil society organizations such as our partner Yazidi were established and equipped to document crimes against Yazidis and seek justice. Child and youth victims, and among them Nobel Prize Nadia Murad, called for justice and brought testimonies. And countries such as Germany started humanitarian programs to help Yazidi women and children that escaped from ISIS, and initiated investigations under the principle of universal jurisdictions. And the impact is indeed quite visible of this kind of concerted effort in Germany, where there are 6 trials where ISIS associates have been tried for genocide and crimes against humanity. And Ms. Wistinghausen, and I'm sorry for the last name pronunciation, just mention one case where she participated on, the case of Taha al-Jumali, an ISIS associate that was sentenced to life in prison for genocide and crimes against humanity. He and his wife purchased Nora and her daughter, a 5-year-old girl, Reda, on the Yazidi slave market. They were beaten and abused until the day Al-Jomali tied Reda to a window on a 50-degree summer heat to punish her for wetting the bed. And it's in that day that the mother watched her daughter die from thirst. And in 2018, one of the employees of the civil society organization Yazda heard about the indictments in Germany and realized that Yazda was in possession of relevant evidence on the case. The employee contacted the German prosecutors and put them in touch with Nora, the key witness, who was then brought to Germany and placed in a witness protection program. Al-Jomali's individual criminal responsibility for the killing of the child was proven through the testimony of Nora. And this would have not been possible without the concerted efforts that I mentioned at the beginning of all actors internationally. So, to conclude, the beginning of a conflict offers crucial opportunities to use resources to establish the facts and take action. So we must have child rights dedicated expertise at that point. And over time, the support of the international community often fades. And so that's when we really need to ensure that civil society organizations are supported in their work to ensure justice and reparation and support efforts to victims, and especially to children, that because the reparation is the one most important stepping stone for long-lasting peace.
Thank you so much for sharing your important work on these kind of investigations, and also some of the challenges. Maybe a short follow-up. What do you see, or where do you see opportunities for states, like, for example, Germany, to support even further and to ensure that this important work is done? Thank you.
Well, Germany is a leading voice that can really make sure that the Human Rights Council, when the mandates of UN investigations are established, there is a specific request to include reporting obligations on crimes affecting children. And also when reports from investigations are presented, including at other forums, like even the Security Council, it's important that states that take the floor specifically ask about the findings that relate to child rights, and so hold those bodies accountable. And then, of course, I would like to also suggest that Germany continues to support meaningful child rights integration strategies in international investigations, such as the deployment of child rights experts in support of specific investigations, or even when governments like Germany are supporting civil society organizations or institutions, it's good to ask for specific reporting on child rights. And then what we saw is that there is still a need to invest in best practices and methodologies and research around that. And furthermore, I think we all touched upon it, but it's great for governments like Germany, but not only, to share the burden and the honor to ensure justice for those crimes by exercising universal jurisdiction over those crimes, over international court crimes. And also share, as I understand it's already being done, share lessons learned out of this exercise, because now there is a really big body of experience coming out of those trials. And finally, just because I touched upon the example of ISIS and the Yazidi, I would also like to encourage governments to treat children associated with ISIS as victims of forcible recruitment, first and foremost, and support them accordingly. And second, I'd encourage also to support the integration into society of children born out of rape. In the case of the Yazidi community, Yazidi mothers are often facing obstacles to register those children because of the complication of the fact that the father is an ISIS perpetrator, and the children are most often not accepted into the Yazidi communities. Thank you. Thank you so much also for sharing your expertise here on this important topic.
We will now go to Aurélie Lamazière. Aurélie is a senior program manager and leading Save the Children's work on accountability for grave violations affecting children, so very important work. Aurélie, maybe, I mean, we have heard a lot of different aspects on that very complicated and complex topic. And we also heard a lot about barriers, structural and systematic barriers. Maybe you can do us all a favor and just summarize a little bit from your perspective where you see the biggest and most important barriers to address.
Thank you, Philippe. It's a great pleasure to take part to this event today with such a distinguished panelists online in the room. And thank you, Mrs. Amtsberg, for your support and leadership on that topic. It is challenging to be the last speaker. We heard so many inspiring and reality check interventions from my co-panelists, so it's which is great. So I will only echo, reinforce, and hopefully summarize a little bit some of many of the recommendations that have been shared. Let me just start maybe to say that as part of its work to advocate for protecting children in conflict, Save the Children has been working for several years now towards giving more visibility to violations and crime affecting children in conflict. We recently received a very generous support from the European Union that enables us to develop further this work on this topic in the coming year. And thanks to this EU support, we can raise awareness, as we do in this event today, but also foster support from member states on the issue, exchange lessons learned, good practice, trigger collaboration, develop new tool in collaboration with key actors, including Justice Rapid Response. We are fully aware that it is a very challenging endeavor with lots of obstacles and barriers to put visibility on children's violations. But we have heard through the presentation just now that there are also very promising efforts to change our approaches and methodology with really concrete solutions, so we can really try to give children a greater access to the justice that they deserve, and we really need to promote these achievements further and consolidate them. So let me just briefly recap the key barrier. We are clear that children remain the majority or one of the main victims of violations and abuse of crimes. The war in Ukraine is one of the reminder of that reality, and there are still many conflicts also not to be forgotten besides Ukraine. So yet the children remain invisible in those justice processes. There is a general perception, as we have heard also, that children are not reliable witnesses. Practitioners are hesitant to interview children. It's probably causing harm, and it's extra responsibility and complexity to work with children. The conception also that children suffer in war is often limited to some key crimes like recruitment and use or sexual violence, but it's really important to explore further crimes that can affect them, attacks on schools, on medical facilities. There are a range of crimes that need further looked into. Also, we touch on that about interviewing children as a particularly challenging endeavor, but we realize it's a really highly divisive questions. So the preference is not to interview children, but because of the ethical dilemma that it causes, but we should really try to explore other means to collect children's account so that their full stories and sufferings are coming on the forefront. Political will is also a key barrier that we want to address and overcome. it is essential, basically, to have that political support to put children's violations and accountability for children's violations securely on the international agenda through consistently, I think, raising awareness and raising the need to strengthen these mechanisms. With related expertise to be included in those mechanisms, like from the onset, within the mandates of those mechanisms. Finally, structural issues that are there we know are obstacles. The absence maybe of guidance, of generic guidance on like how to document children violations. And there is a need to increase collaboration, coordination also between various mechanisms, within international mechanisms, but also within national and international mechanisms, and between mechanisms and civil society or organization. So yeah, these are just an overview of the barriers that we are all aware of, but ready to overcome.
Thank you very much. A lot of barriers, a lot of work to do still. As we are in the middle of Berlin, as much in the middle of Berlin as one can be, I think, maybe if I can ask you to maybe also explore a little bit more the role of states, again, maybe specifically the German government, of how to address these barriers and what you're actually asking, what kind of support you're asking.
Yes, we have a long list of recommendations for the German government. Here it is. But we recognize, we appreciate, and we're making these recommendations. We know, because we know the German government is both an accountability champion and a child rights champion, and the combination of those two championships puts the government in a good position to do more than to support this greater prioritization and visibility of children, both domestically. We heard it on the recommendations on the universal jurisdiction, but also within your own policy, and in higher diplomatic fora. Why is that political support, essential, and how? What does it triggers? It is basically, your voice will mean that, or will push that all international mechanisms embed child-specific expertise and maintain that expertise for as long as the mandate lasts. We have very, encouraging deployment of experts in a lot of existing mechanisms, commissions of inquiry, like in Ukraine or in Palestine, commission of inquiry. These needs to be further developed and maintained. We heard also Mrs. Marchi-Uhel talking about all the expertise that are deployed. We are very grateful to have Mrs. Luping now heading that unit. We really need to ensure that expertise is maintained throughout the length and the mandate of these mechanisms. We're also really hoping that the German government can also play a really key role in supporting this, the dialogue and coordination between the various mechanisms. We feel that, this is, particularly important, just as an illustration in the case of Ukraine, where we see there are multiple mechanisms that are deployed, and it's certainly a very positive thing. We really would like those mechanisms that are out there in like an unprecedented way. Those multiple avenues can focus on children violations from the onset of their investigation. But obviously they need to coordinate, and they need to specially coordinate their focus on children's violation. I think you, Mrs. Amtsberg, you're going to New York, to the UN General Assembly. This is a great moment to again, pass on these messages. I think there will be a few key events where these messages can be echoed and where Germany can play a leading role in this. If I have time, maybe a couple more. Not recommendations for all of us to take, but we heard this key word that I think many of us pronounce, this intersectional approach, which is very, very jargony. It basically means just to look at children in their diversity, with looking at them depending on the age they're at, what gender they are, and with the vulnerability that comes with their background and their experiences of war. So we need to keep, I guess, on promoting or on being aware of that aspect and ensuring that approach is translated into the mechanism. I will stop here and thank you. We'll really look forward to continuing collaborating with you on this topic.
Thank you so much, Aurélie, for summarizing all of that and making clear what the expectation is towards the government. I mean, it's an unbelievable disciplined panel. We are almost on time, which is unheard of when you have 6 speakers. So we will have plenty of opportunity for some of the questions. Please be reminded again, send them via email to the email address accountability@savethechildren.de. If you can, maybe also try to make sure that it is clear who you are addressing this question to. But now, before we come to the questions actually from the online audience and also from here from the room, I want to give Luise Amtsberg the word again, and I'm a little bit sorry. I see that you're writing all the expectation that comes with being a champion in that regard, and maybe you can just give us a little bit a glimpse into your main takeaways from all of that and what you have heard today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I feel the room that you are already sorry for me. I don't know if I can summarize as good as the points we heard here in the room. But I think, first of all, we can say that it's not necessary to, in all parts of this field, to reinvent the wheel, I would say. But yeah, and this is why there are so many organizations and NGOs working this field and providing information and actually really helping people in need, especially children. So because of that work, we don't need to reinvent. So let me make this very clear. Because for us as a government, of course, we depend on the information and the experience of the NGOs and the civil society. I think, where do I start? So I think, yeah, maybe first of all, we need to strengthen their work by funding, of course, and by listening and having events like this, exchanging our experiences, maybe also talking about what we can do, what we can achieve, and in what time. That would be one thing. So having this conversation is really necessary for us. Also being honest about what we can achieve. And I'm referring to the budget negotiations we're having in the parliament right now and the many difficulties we have to, raise fundings to spend more money, even more money in humanitarian action and also our development policy. So this would be one thing. What we have to keep in mind, but I think I made clear that the German government is really focusing on that issue and the rights of children, especially in their work in our development policy and our foreign policy. Second would be that we have to gather data, and also I've heard that from Ms. Tronchin, that we have to strengthen child-specific reportings. I think this is really necessary for the policy, for us as policy makers, to really know what we are talking about. And sometimes I have the feeling that we are not talking about children's rights because we don't have so much information about it. What specific children abuses when it comes to that, and this is something we have to change also in our political debate on a day-to-day, in our daily discussions we have. So third, I wrote down focus on jurisdiction is key. This conference makes this clear. I mean, we are talking about accountability, so of course our focus is on jurisdiction and how to strengthen the rights of children in regard of this. And I think it's good that the German courts have applied the principle of universal jurisdiction, but also we have to strengthen their work, this financially and also with personnel, I think, because the challenges we are facing are getting bigger. So we need to be prepared for that, especially when we focus on Ukraine at the moment. So connecting their work to the international level and also changing experiences, this was what Mrs. Luping was highlighting. I think this is also very important to really exchange experiences on a national and international level, because we are also interested as a German government that other states will follow on a national level. So we can really have a good partnership with many states, and also in this being able to strengthen the rights of children on an international level. So what I learned from you is that we also have to talk about how we can empower the system when it comes to child-friendly jurisdiction. Child-friendly jurisdiction, and I think we need to find ways how to strengthen the rooms outside of a courtroom where we can, or where you, for example, can talk to a child in a child-friendly environment. And there are some possibilities. I don't know if it is already happening, but talking about psychologists and a child-friendly environment means also that we can help the children who are affected or who experienced abuse, but also gather information which could be necessary for the courtroom. So this would be something where we could also focus here in Germany on to strengthen this. And I know this debate very well from my time as a spokeswoman for refugee policy, because we also have that there. There is no real child-friendly asylum procedure, but it's necessary to also focus on the experiences children have made on their way to Germany. And this is also something we can strengthen and also learn from that. And yeah, there we also don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can, if we focus on that in children's rights in jurisdiction, that also means that we can strengthen their rights in the asylum procedure, for example. So that would be something I would take away from our discussion here today. Now I have to check. Our bilaterals. I think this is also very important that we make it a top priority when we go into discussions with other states about their human rights records, that we highlight, and this is also what feminist foreign policy means, that we highlight the rights of children. This is really a big part in our new approach, that we really focus on them, not them as being part of something evil, but being the focus for us. And so we can create guidelines how to deal with states where there is, where children's rights are violated. So the bilaterals, of course, means also, and this is also what we address with our feminist foreign policy, means also the embassies. I don't know if you said it before, that there need to be expertise on children, and that also means that our embassy have to be able to identify this as a special focus for our foreign policy, and that they address that in their daily work. So, and one thing, do I have the time? Sorry, but one thing I found out when I traveled to Zambia a month ago, where children are imprisoned by the age of 8, was that there are many states. I mean, this is not a conflict region, I'm aware of that, but could be also very helpful to talk about what conflict means when it comes to children's rights, but that's just a side note. Zambia, I would say there is no conflict, and also a government which is quite progressive, I think, a new government, and they changed the age now to 12. So, but what they are facing now is that we have to ask the question, why was it like this? Why were children imprisoned by the age of 8? And the reason was that they couldn't deal with them on a social level when there was like stealing from someone or being involved in some criminal activity. So because they don't have a social support system, children were imprisoned. And now we have the situation that they want to change that, but they don't know how to deal with it financially when it comes to the social issues connected to this. And this is something we can address with our development policy. I think we should address that. And that was something I really learned, having a society which was against that imprisonment or this procedures, and also a state and a government which exactly knows that this is not child-friendly and, of course, a violation of children's rights. So we have all the stakeholders being aware of this really big violation, but still there was they didn't know how to deal with that. And this is really something we need to focus on in our development policy. And the last point would be support of civil society. I said it already, I think, in the beginning, so, but I can also highlight that in the end. Supporting civil society, Save the Children, and all the stakeholders who are working this field is not only something which is like right, but it's also necessary to have this impact on our policy, especially with focus on feminist foreign policy, a strategy we are still developing, and I think this could also be something I can take away from today, that we have to make sure my office, and of course Annalena Baerbock, our foreign minister, is aware of this and focusing on children's rights in her work, but that we really make it a big part of our strategy, which we are creating at the moment for a value-led foreign policy and also a feminist foreign policy. So, thank you.
Thanks so much
for having me so long.
No, I think it's great to go out of an event like that with a to-do list that concrete.
My office good. Always is that, but
yeah, exactly. So, exactly. So we now turn to a couple of questions, and for that I would ask Lea Meyer, who is also working for Save the Children in the advocacy department, to select a couple of questions that came via the email address.
Yes, sorry, so yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, thank you very much. There were a couple of questions coming in, really interesting ones, so it's hard to decide which one to take. But so there were two questions actually that were addressed to all panelists, and it's a bit related to the time frame of investigations. So the first comment I will read out is, it's great to have a panel with so many experts of accountability. The persecution of crimes often take many years. How do you make sure that children who testify are protected from further violations and crimes during that investigations? So that's the first question. And maybe I will add the second one that is focusing on the Human Rights Council, actually. So this question is, since the question about how states can support keeps coming up, it would be helpful if states at the Human Rights Council start to advocate for longer mandates to investigative bodies, for instance, the commissions of inquiries, fact-finding missions, and so on. Building trust with children and implementing a truly effective victim-centered age and gender-sensitive approach takes time, and it is very hard to implement when mandates are sometimes as short as 9 months. Their eventual extension is only known at the last minute, and as a result there is a high staff turnover. If the Council could give mandates for a year instead of only yearly basis, this would ease the task to engage with children in a respectful way. So yeah, maybe we have this round and then a second one.
So I'm looking at all of you to see if someone feels like already jumping on one or the other question. Yes, please go ahead. Luping.
Thank you, and thank you for those questions. I'd like to talk about the issue of the question of the stopping of new crimes and protection of children issues. Now, obviously, from the ICC perspective, we're only one part of the jigsaw puzzle in terms of ensuring protection for children, including in conflict zones. We do have a long period of time in our cases. That's quite common with the international tribunals. That is true. In terms of stopping crimes, well, we don't have power on that front as such. We have to rely on other partners and stakeholders. But we would hope that in terms of the role that we have to play in terms of ensuring for accountability and stopping impunity, that together with others, that we are sending messages, first of all, a message to the perpetrators and members of these armed groups that are carrying out the crimes. So that's the first point. More concretely, when we engage with our particular witnesses, it's very critical and important for us that we ensure that the right support is being provided. So it's not just during an interview, but we want to make sure that we, with other key actors, really work properly in ensuring for proper protection of children. That's both from a security protection perspective, but also psychological support. So we do that in different ways, including with working, for example, with the Victims and Witness Unit in our court, but also it's important for us to work with key actors in the fields that we seek to identify in every situation country that we work in, those who are able to assist in providing that type of support. I would agree that this is a really critical issue for us as an office, as a court, and for our other partners. And I think this is a really important issue in terms of cooperation and dialogue that we should follow up on. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Is there additional ideas that, yeah.
Thank you. I can follow through what Dianne Luping said. Maybe for the part that relates to civil society organizations, when we look at these long times for prosecution, those are the entities that most often are the ones that came in contact with the children at first, and we remain in contact while the justice proceedings move forward. So it's really crucial that when they start documenting those crimes, they are supported financially, but also with expertise. For example, in the case we mentioned before, it was very important that civil society organizations had strong databases, or that when they had their interviewings of victims, they were accompanied by experts that had done that with levels that, with standards that could hold in a trial eventually. And supporting them also over time, over the years, because again, they are the ones staying there. And when it comes to the other question on the mandates of investigations, I think it would be great to take into account victim-centered considerations and the time they take by maybe having a gradual reporting, because we know it's very important to establish a common understanding of the facts that the international community can stand on. And maybe something that could be considered is indeed the longer mandates with gradual reporting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Katharine, I saw that you also wanted to comment on that.
Yes, thank you, Philip. Maybe just to address the second question a little bit. I cannot speak for Commission Inquiry fact-finding missions, but what I can share, which is echoing the concern expressed in the question, is that if one really wants to integrate perspectives of children and youth into the form of support that is provided to accountability and justice in particular, it requires time. to build engagement. It requires time to, as we are now engaging, have a focus group discussion with groups of children and groups of youth. You don't do that overnight. You need to build the relationship with civil society actors on the ground, and you need to be able to develop an approach that is child sensitive when conducting such consultation. Here, I'm not talking about collecting evidence. I'm talking about understanding the perspectives of children, so that the type of work that you do in your accountability framework is really reflecting those and is inclusive of those views. And indeed, when you have a mandate that is too short, with a turnover of staff, it's actually very difficult to achieve that. For us, having this continuity of engagement, we've seen that with engaging with victims and survivors, adults. It takes time to build the trust. It takes time to change topic, approach different groups, different communities, and it's the same with children, probably even more complicated. So I can only echo that if one wants to have a proactive approach in this area, it's really necessary to do that with enough time and time of preparation and time to implement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aurélie.
Thank you. I just wanted to build on the answer from Federica and Catherine, also on this, like the challenges of the short time frame and the mandate and the invisibility or of the children within that. Like very practically. Advocacy behind the scenes during also the negotiation of those resolution establishing mandates is quite critical, because if you have strong language inserted in the resolution already, it definitely triggers more support for that for further expertise, money, etc. And we see very practically at the Human Rights Council, for instance, in the negotiation of resolution, member states are supportive of language on gender, which is very much needed, of course, and should be continue. We struggle to insert the children's dimension into those the resolution in the language of the resolution, and so again, this political support from member states to support that inclusion of language makes already also a huge difference to ensure longer deployment of expertise over time. So this is something very practical and to think about and to build on. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have time for a very quick last round of questions. So I'm looking at Leah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will try to keep it short and summarize 3 questions in a round. So one is addressed actually to you, Mrs. von Wistinghausen. Since you have both domestic and international experience, do you feel there is enough of a knowledge transfer, and how could that be strengthened on the defense lawyer side? So that's a specific question to you. And then we have 2 questions that are focusing more actually on the national part, and they are, I think, addressed to Mrs. Amtsberg and also Mrs. von Wistinghausen. So what can be done to ensure that child rights are respected in trials here in Germany and other Western countries? So it's an example from a colleague from Terre des Hommes. In the last 2 years, there were 2 cases where former child soldiers were trialed and sentenced to several years in prison in German courts in Berlin and Nuremberg for activities they were forced to do as child soldiers. Both were below the age of 15 at this time. The trial cases were not respecting child rights adequately, but mainly looking at the children as terrorists. Terre des Hommes has put these cases in the current reporting procedure on the UN CRC implementation by Germany. So this is focusing on the trials. And a second one was related to the protection of children who arrive as as separated and unaccompanied minors. So, yeah, this question would be to Mrs. von Wistinghausen. She would be interested to hear the opinion how to advance children's rights in the area drawing on international experience. So how can children better be protected here in Germany? And yeah, I leave it there. I receive a lot of...
Thank you very much. Not exactly yes-no questions.
But the first one was a no question.
Okay.
But I don't know if you remember the question. It was if there was enough training, if I understand it correctly, right, for defense lawyers and exchange between well, national colleagues and those who are working at the international tribunals. And the answer is clearly no. We are not even a handful of lawyers here in Germany who have some experience in international criminal law. And there is very little exchange. So who should, you know, take care of this? Of course, the bar associations. And you know, I'm trying. I can see there is now, because of the unfortunate developments in the world, everyone is talking about international criminal law, and the newspapers are full of it. So there is more awareness, and so there is more interest. But I can't really tell you why, because it's such an, you know, such an interesting area of law. There is little expertise. And I think that training and exchange would be really important, also between prosecutors, also between judges, and of course lawyers. And we all need training, because if we don't know what's out there, we can't really bring it into the courtroom. And I just give you as an example, many lawyers, be it judges or defense lawyers in our courtrooms, have never heard of the IIIM, and they have never heard of UNITAD. And I'm not, you know, I'm not criticizing this. It's just a fact, and that's, of course, it's quite disastrous, you know, because there are so many tools you could use if you knew who you can address, and that certainly needs to change. Yeah. The question about the respect of children when you have a child soldier, you know, accused of having committed crimes, that's a very difficult topic. I mean, I can't really speak about these trials in detail because I just don't have the knowledge. But here again, I think, and I'm basing this on my observations in other trials, I think it's just a lack of knowledge and expertise, so a lack of awareness, a lack of sensitivity for these issues. You know, it's not for a very long time that German courts are dealing with these kind of crimes. And the approach of many judges, sometimes also prosecutors and defense attorneys, is well, it's just, you know, it's just another criminal trial. So, you know, let's not make it different than if it was just based on the national laws that we've had forever. But of course, you know, here there are so many other aspects that play in, and sometimes it's also a very pragmatic approach. You know, how can we get the problem from the table as quickly as possible, and so that you don't get into the nitty-gritty of things. And I've experienced this in the courtroom when I wanted to introduce reports that I thought were really important and interesting for the judges to know, to have the background. They were actually not really interested because yeah, it takes time, and then the documentation is very often in English, and there is no translation. Yeah. So, you know, it also starts with language, and I mean, there are just yeah, so many different issues there.
And I think there's still a lot of open questions here, and we only have started to touch on some of those. Unfortunately, we are running a little bit out of time, so I have to cut this short at this point. I think there's still, I mean, a lot of things that we can say about it, and a lot of conversation that we can continue. And I would now ask Florian to come to the floor with the task to summarize some of those open questions again. And yeah, take us away.
And frankly a bit presumptuous, so I'm not even going to try and use 2 minutes to summarize the richness of this debate. I said in the beginning that I was cautiously optimistic about this topic, and I think this discussion has really confirmed my cautious optimism. I think it's shown the wealth of expertise that we have here on the panel, but also these experts represent governments, international institutions, civil society organizations that bring a lot of resources and above all a lot of commitment to this task. And that leaves me really with maybe two parting thoughts and an invitation. And the first thought is, okay, if we have all that commitment in place, we have the law in place, we heard that as well. One of the key ingredients we will continue to need is political will. It's the political courage to actually take up these sometimes sensitive questions, and especially also when you're talking to the bullies in the international community, those who are responsible for these crimes. And so I was really encouraged to hear from Luise Amtsberg that the rights of children are going to be at the core of the feminist foreign policy that Germany is also, that you will take to the UN General Assembly just these days. So that's number one. Number two is we don't actually really have a choice here. We owe this to children who are affected by violations, by crimes now. But we also owe it to future generations, because whatever we can achieve now hopefully will help to prevent these violations from happening quite as much as they still do in future. And then the final thought is an invitation. For us, this is an ongoing dialogue. We are looking for allies, frankly. We are looking for allied governments. We're looking for allies in civil society, in academia, wherever. Those of you who are listening, those of you who are in the room, please continue to work with Save the Children on this cause, continue to support with us, criticize us, engage with us, but try and, let's make this a joint endeavor to really ensure that there is more justice for children affected by conflicts. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. Great rest.